Did you ever have to pretend everything was fine when it really wasn't?
The call did not last long, just enough for my mother to clear her throat in that careful way she uses when she wants to sound reasonable and kind, and then to tell me that this year Thanksgiving was for high achievers only, which, in their version of family math, did not include me, and I remember standing there with the phone pressed to my ear while she explained that it was nothing personal, that they were trying a smaller table, that my sister had a lot of important people to impress, and that it would be awkward if I felt out of place, as if I have not been out of place in that house since I was old enough to understand where the applause always landed. I could have argued, because I know how to list bullet points of quiet things I have done that no one ever noticed, but I did not, because the more she talked the clearer everything became, and the clearest part was not the insult, which I have heard in different shapes for years, but the realization that they believed the insult would be safe, that I would swallow it like I always have, and that I would still keep the machine running that none of them know exists, the one that keeps their favorite person shining without smudges. I said I understood, and I made my voice calm and even, and I even found a polite joke about how I would not bring down their seating average, and she laughed in that relieved way that says the situation has been successfully managed. And then she asked if I could still swing by later in the week to help pick up some supplies for the dessert table, because my sister was slammed with deadlines and the bakery order had to be handled by someone reliable, and I said I would check my schedule, and I let the silence hang until she said she loved me, and I replied that I loved her too, and I meant it, just not in the way she thinks. When I hung up, I stood in my kitchen and let the words sit there until they stopped stinging, and while they cooled I walked through the greatest hits of our family stories, the ones where my sister is the lead, a prodigy, a storm of talent and connections, and the ones where I am the practical one, the safe pair of hands, the person who can be counted on to show up when the glamorous people are too busy being glamorous, and if I sound bitter, I am not exactly, because I made choices that let them see me this way, and I can own that, but owning it does not mean I have to keep paying for it. The part they never ask about, because it would ruin the myth, is how the shine gets paid for, and I have learned that the shine is not cheap, and that it does not pay for itself even when someone is very good at pretending it does, and that some people are happy to build a life on a story as long as no one checks the receipts, and I have kept those receipts organized, lined up, quietly handled, because it was simpler and because I told myself I was protecting the family from friction we could not survive, and also because I wanted to believe I was kinder than the people who had made me feel small. There is a certain power in being the one who knows the codes, the one who remembers which draft is due, which fee hits on which day, which little alarm must be silenced before it wakes up a larger mess, and I have been that person for longer than I care to admit. Not for love of control, but for love of peace, and because for a while it felt like I was doing something good, something sisterly, something that kept everyone moving forward, even if my name never came up when the toasts were made, and the photos were captioned and the stories were told about who made what possible. What my mother said about the table snapped something gentle but essential, not a dramatic crack, not a scene, just the quiet truth that if I am not good enough to sit and pass the potatoes, then I am not required to fuel the engine that drives the parade. And once I saw that clearly, it felt less like revenge and more like clarity, and clarity can feel like heat when it first arrives, but then it becomes light and you can finally see what is right in front of you. I made tea I did not drink, opened my laptop, and logged into an account I know better than my own, the one that hums along in the background of her success. The one that thanks me each month with a small green check mark that means I have kept the story intact for one more cycle, and I looked at the toggle that keeps that cycle turning, and I looked at it for a long minute, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to remember the exact second when I stopped being the understudy to my own life. I turned it off, and the page asked if I was certain, and I read the confirmation sentence slowly, and I clicked yes, and then I closed the laptop and felt a stillness I have not felt in years, not triumph, not bitterness, just a steady calm that said I had finally aligned my actions with the truth I have been refusing to acknowledge. They wanted high achievers at the table, and that is fine, because I have just achieved something I should have done a long time ago, and when the first notice arrives and the first call is made and the first performance starts to wobble, I will be the quiet one who does not pick up, because I am done auditioning for a seat I was never going to be offered, and because I already know exactly what I have stopped doing, and none of them has the faintest idea what is about to hit. People imagine that favoritism is loud, that it is the confetti and the speeches and the photo walls, but it does not begin there. It begins in small, quiet decisions that look like kindness and feel like responsibility. And that is exactly how I ended up paying my sister's loans without a thank you, without a word, and without a line in the family story where my name would be said out loud with anything like respect. Because in our house, the shiny person needed to stay shiny and the steady person was expected to keep wiping the fingerprints off the glass, and for a long time I told myself that keeping the shine going made me a good person who rose above all the petty scorekeeping that everyone else seemed addicted to. When Amanda finished school and the grace period vanished, I was the one who got the shaky call at night with the voice that had never asked for anything suddenly asking for everything, and she promised it would just be a few months while she settled into the job that paid more in compliments than in cash, and I believed her because I wanted to protect the calm and because our parents had a way of turning any problem into a referendum on my character if I did not help solve it. And I did not have the stomach for another round of being told that I was selfish for keeping what I earned when my sister had so much potential riding on her reputation. The first payments felt like a bandage on a small cut, a helpful gesture that would dry and fall off on its own, and then the months stacked into years. And the bandage turned into a quiet pipeline that moved money from my account to the account that made Amanda look successful. And even as my life got tighter, I left that line open, because every family dinner stayed easier when the bills were not screaming in the background. Somewhere along the way she stopped saying thank you, and then she stopped acknowledging it altogether, and then she started talking about how independent she was, and how no one had ever handed her anything. And I smiled through it because confronting her would have been a bonfire that our parents would have blamed on my jealousy, and because telling the truth would have made me the villain in a story I did not write, and because I honestly wanted to believe that whatever I was pouring into her would eventually free me from being the permanent helper, though I can see now that help can harden into a cage when the person you are helping decides they like the view. I kept spreadsheets, not because I was preparing a courtroom moment, but because I needed to know whether I could still hit my own obligations while underwriting hers, and month after month I moved things around, trimmed here and postponed there, and learned more about federal servicers than any person who did not borrow the money should ever need to learn, and I made the calls when a payment date fell on a weekend, and I fixed the clerical mistakes, and I set up autopay from my card with my email as the primary contact so that nothing would slip through a crack that did not belong to me. The day they told me Thanksgiving was for achievers, I realized the only thing I had ever achieved in that family was making it possible for them to pretend I did not exist, and that realization did not light a fuse so much as it turned on a light. And once that light was on, I could see exactly where to put my hands if I wanted to stop the machine without throwing a tantrum or starting a fight I would be accused of losing before it began. I did not rage, and I did not draft a speech, and I did not rehearse confrontations in the shower like some sad late-night monologue. I simply sat down and opened the accounts that had been humming under my name, and I began closing windows of responsibility that were never mine, and the funny thing is that the system tries to talk you out of it, with cheerful alerts and gentle warnings about losing benefits and missing out on tiny discounts that are supposed to feel like free money, but those little incentives only work on a person who still wants to participate, and I did not. I removed my email from all communications and replaced it with hers so that the next late notice would ring in the home where the praise lives. And I revoked my authorization to speak on the account so that when she called the servicer to fix it, she would meet a wall that only the borrower can climb. And I deleted the card from the autopay profile, and I exported my records to a folder with a plain name. And I did not send them to anyone, not yet, because I did not need to win a debate. I only needed to stop subsidizing a lie, and stopping felt like taking a deep breath after holding it for far too long. I thought about texting her a warning, some fair-minded message about taking over her own bills now that she was, in their words, such a star, but the same calm that kept me quiet on the phone with our mother kept me quiet here too. Because the point was not to gloat or to gash, The point was to return ownership to the person who has spent years performing independence while privately outsourcing the cost. If this sounds cold, then maybe you have never been told by your own parents that your presence is a downgrade, because once you hear that sentence and let it settle into your bones, the temperature in every room changes. And what once looked like support looks like self-betrayal, and what once felt like duty feels like complicity, and that shift will make you do things you should have done a long time ago. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect, which, I am learning, is quieter than anger and far more durable. So I sat there and watched the confirmation emails vanish into the ether because they no longer came to me, and I set my phone down, and I noticed that I was not bracing for the next request. And I realized I had finally stepped out of the role they assigned me and back into my own life, and then, because I am still me, I made one last move that no one will see coming, which is that I added a fraud alert to my card and a block on any new automatic billing from that servicer, so even if someone tries to be clever and sneak my number back in, the charge will fail and the call will go to her, and when it does, she will learn that the grown-up part of independence is not the applause, it is the bill, and the bill is now hers. And I am ready to hear how the family plans to celebrate that achievement. The first notice arrived faster than I expected, which is probably because the balance was large and the lenders do not wait around to see whether someone eventually gets their act together. And the moment that email slipped into the inbox tied to my sister's account, the silence that had covered our arrangement for years finally cracked open. At first, Amanda must have thought it was some clerical glitch, maybe an autopay that had bounced or a technical hiccup, because she left me a casual voicemail in her bright, airy voice saying something about how there must have been a mix-up and asking if I could handle it like usual, as if the responsibility was mine by natural law. I listened to her words more than once, not because I needed to, but because the way she said like usual landed harder than I expected, with all the entitlement packed neatly into those two words. Like she had forgotten there was ever a beginning to this arrangement, and that maybe it could have an end. I let the message sit, and I did not respond, and soon the casual tone was gone, replaced by a second voicemail where she sounded nervous, like a person rehearsing the right mix of annoyance and charm, telling me the email said payment had been missed and late fees were about to stack, and how it could hurt her credit, and how that would be catastrophic because she was in the middle of something huge with work. I do not know if she realized that phrase was the very one my parents had used on me for years whenever I asked why Amanda got more, why Amanda was excused, why Amanda deserved another chance. Because she was in the middle of something huge, always, and the rest of us were apparently in the middle of nothing. By the end of the week, the messages turned into calls at all hours, and when I finally picked up one evening it was not because I felt bad, but because I wanted to hear her voice when she realized the safety net was gone. She started with the panicked laugh, the one she uses when she is trying to downplay a disaster, but within minutes the laugh broke into pleading, and she asked me what had happened, why the payments were not going through, and when I said, calmly, that I had stopped paying, there was a silence so thick I could hear her breathing shift into something sharp and ragged. She asked if I was joking, if this was some test, and when I said no, her voice changed into anger faster than I thought possible, accusing me of betrayal, of jealousy, of trying to ruin her life. What she could not admit, even in that furious outburst, was that it had never been her life alone. It had always been built on pieces she borrowed from me, and the foundation she stood on had been poured from my labor. I told her she had the same tools I had, the same phone, the same login, the same job she bragged about, and that if she was such a high achiever, she would figure it out, because achievers do not rely on their sisters' paychecks to stay afloat. The words hung between us like something dangerous, and I could almost feel her searching for the script that had always worked, the one where she plays the star and I play the support, but the script no longer applied, and she knew it. When she finally told our parents, the response was as predictable as a rerun of a show you have seen too many times. My father called me with that clipped tone he reserves for when he wants to make me feel like a child who forgot a chore, saying Amanda had too much on her plate to deal with financial minutiae, and that I was being petty and vindictive, as if the years I spent bailing her out were erased by one decision to stop. He said family pulls together, and I almost laughed because in our family, pulling together always meant me pulling harder while everyone else rode comfortably on my back. I did not argue. I just told him that if they only wanted achievers at their Thanksgiving table, then they should let Amanda show them just how high she could climb without me carrying her on my shoulders. He sputtered, called me ungrateful, accused me of trying to sabotage my sister's future, but under all of that I could hear the panic starting to set in, because the image they had sold to the world, the perfect daughter with the spotless record, was beginning to wobble. The next few days were a blur of texts, voicemails, even emails from Amanda, sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, sometimes promising she would pay me back if I just helped her get through this rough patch. As if she had not already drained years of my income without once handing me a single dollar back. I watched each message appear and I let them sit, because the point was not to be cruel, but to finally force her to own what was hers. For the first time in years, I was not bracing myself for the next demand or the next guilt trip, and the quiet in my own life felt heavier than I expected, but also cleaner, like air after a storm, and I knew this was only the beginning of the fallout. Because my sister does not know how to fail in private, and soon enough the performance would collapse in front of the audience my parents had cultivated for her. And when that happened, when the story they told started to crumble, I would be right there, not to rescue her, but to watch what happens when the role of golden child no longer comes with a scriptwriter behind the curtain. I knew the day she would show up because the pattern is always the same in our family. First the soft asks that sound like favors between sisters, then the sharper reminders that sound like chores I forgot to do. Then the calls from our parents that dress up as moral lectures, and finally the doorbell, which is the point where I am expected to swallow my frustration, make coffee, and fix the mess so everyone can get back to pretending that effort and outcomes are perfectly aligned with virtue, and that the person who receives the applause actually did the heavy lifting. So when Amanda arrived with that tight smile people use when they are trying to hide panic behind anger, I was already steady and ready, not because I wanted a fight, but because I was done giving away my peace to keep her myth intact. She started with the performance about misunderstandings and banking glitches, and how humiliating it was to get emails at work about delinquent payments, and how there was a promotion brewing, and how timing was everything, and how she knew I would never sabotage her like this, and for a moment I almost reached for the old script out of muscle memory. Until I remembered the sentence about Thanksgiving being for high achievers only, and I felt the same calm click into place that I had felt when I turned off the autopay. I told her we could sit at the table and talk like adults who understand that bills are not personal insults, they are obligations, and that the person whose name is on the obligation is the person who needs to meet it. And when she rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic, I slid across a folder I had prepared the night before, which held a clean export of every payment I had made since the first desperate call after her grace period ended. The dates and confirmation numbers and amounts, written out in plain words, the interest reductions I had secured by calling servicers on my lunch breaks, the fee reversals I had negotiated, and the months where I covered extra because she had overspent and needed breathing room. And I watched her scan the pages and go quiet in a way I had not seen since we were kids, and she got caught in a lie that was too big to talk her way out of. She tried to laugh it off by saying I should not have kept a ledger like some petty accountant, and I told her that I kept it because I am not a fool, and because I learned a long time ago that when the story finally breaks, the person who kept the records is the only one who does not get rewritten as the villain. She said she would pay me back, which would have been funny if it were not so sad, because she has never once made a plan that involved paying me back, and I told her that this was not about repayment, not yet, this was about ownership, and that her life could not be powered by a private subsidy anymore, and that if she wanted the respect she demanded from everyone, she had to be the person who did the work behind the scenes, not the person who outsourced it to the sister who never got an invitation when the cameras were out. She called me cruel, and I told her that cruelty was being told by your own parents that your presence drags down the quality of the holiday, and that real cruelty is the kind that arrives wrapped in smiles and family values while someone drains your accounts and says you should be grateful to be included at the kids' table in the corner. I laid out two paths as calmly as I could manage, because the point was not to punish her. The point was to end the cycle without another screaming match that could be blamed on my alleged jealousy. So I told her that she could acknowledge the truth to our parents and to anyone else she had sold the independent story to, and she could start making the payments herself and manage the mess like the adult she claims to be. And in that case, I would keep my mouth shut about the details forever, or she could keep pretending and miss a few more payments and let the consequences fall where they land. And in that case, I would feel free to protect my name by sending a concise summary to the family group thread the next time I was painted as the bitter sister who resents success. She said I was blackmailing her, and I said I was setting boundaries after years of being used, and that there was a difference, and then I pulled out a simple one-page acknowledgement of debt that I had drafted with plain language, no legal posturing, just a written admission that she had benefited from my payments, and that she either intended to repay over time or she did not, and I told her she could choose to sign it to keep this private and adult. Or she could refuse and accept that I would start telling the truth when I am accused again. She stared at the paper, then at me, and said our parents would never forgive me if I forced her into a corner like this, and I said they already told me who they are willing to forgive and who they are willing to exclude, and that I am done living by rules that only apply to me. She left without signing, which I expected, because admitting the truth would require her to admit that the image is a costume she cannot afford without help, and I watched her go with a kind of sadness that was not weak, just honest. And I put the folder back in the drawer and the acknowledgement back in its envelope, and I set both on the counter where I would see them every morning, a reminder that silence is a choice and compliance is a choice, and that I had finally learned how to choose myself. And as the door clicked shut, I realized I had one final move left, something simple and clean that would either bring this to a quiet end or crack the image wide open, and I decided that if she did not make a payment by the morning of Thanksgiving, I would deliver it without another word. Thanksgiving morning arrived without fanfare and without an invitation, and I did exactly what I promised myself I would do, which was to check the account that used to hum quietly under my name and confirm that nothing had been paid from the person who loves to remind the world how independent she is, and when the screen showed what I already knew it would show, I opened the folder on my desktop that holds the clean record of every month I carried her, attached the summary and the simple one-page acknowledgement she refused to sign, and wrote a plain message to the family thread that has spent years praising effort that was never actually performed by the person receiving the praise, a message that said I hope the meal is lovely, that I heard the table this year was reserved for high achievers, that I have achieved my freedom by ending a private subsidy that never had my name on it, and that any questions about missed payments should be directed to the borrower, not to the person who finally went off payroll. Then I hit send and closed the laptop with the kind of calm that only shows up when you align your behavior with the truth you stopped trying to ignore. The phone started within minutes, because presentation is everything in my family and nothing threatens presentation more than facts with receipts, and my mother called first with a soft voice that asked why I would humiliate my sister on a holiday, which would have been funny if it were not so predictable, since she had apparently forgotten that the humiliation began when she told me there was no seat for me at the table because the table was only for winners, and I told her as gently as I could manage that facts are not attacks, that they're the floor we stand on when stories wobble, and that if she wanted the version where I keep paying and keep quiet, then she should have thought about the cost when she repeated that line about high achievers like it was a prayer. And while she tried to talk over me with a familiar mix of guilt and policy, a second buzz came in from my father with a text about family loyalty and how I was destroying Amanda's prospects, and I responded once in writing with a sentence that said the only prospect I destroyed was the prospect of me being used without acknowledgement, and that the account now belongs to the adult it was always supposed to belong to. And that was the last time I explained anything to either of them that day. Amanda did not wait for the thread. She called, and when I did not pick up, she sent a voice message that started with fury, pivoted into bargaining, and slid into a kind of cracking honesty I had not heard from her in years, where she admitted that the image had outrun the money and that the timing could not be worse and that the people she had promised results to would not understand, and she asked me what it would take to make me turn the autopay back on just long enough to buy her a month. And I told her there was no price for that because the bank is closed and the vault is empty and the rules have changed, and that the only terms left were the same ones I had offered at the table in my kitchen, which were that she take ownership and tell the truth, or she keep pretending and carry the consequences alone. And I reminded her that I had already removed my email, revoked authorization, blocked new automatic billing, and forwarded the statements to her address, because even if I suddenly lost my resolve, the systems would not let me slide back into the old role without leaving a trail that I have no intention of writing again. She accused me of trying to ruin her life, and I told her that a life cannot be ruined by the arrival of its actual cost, and that we were both just meeting the truth at the same time, she at the front door and me on the back steps. Word travels fast in a family that loves a tidy legend, so by the time the turkey was carved and the speeches began, I had already heard from a cousin who wanted the tea, an aunt who called me brave like this was a social media stunt, and an uncle who asked if there was anything he could do and then suggested I apologize to my parents to keep the peace, and I let every message pass through me without landing because none of them had been there at midnight when the autopay failed and the servicer called me instead of the borrower, and because none of them had ever offered to split a single bill during the years they cheered the story my parents wrote about their golden one. And while I listened to the chorus grow, another email pinged into my inbox. This one from the loan servicer with a bland, automated line informing me that a new payment method had been added by the primary account holder and that my access remained removed. And I stared at those words for a long moment, not because I doubted them, but because they were the sentence I had been waiting for since I clicked the switch that turned off the machine. I will not pretend that the rest of the day was easy, because the part of me that still wants a simple family where everyone behaves their best knocked around inside my chest and asked whether I had gone too far, whether there was a gentler way to get here. And I told that part that kinder does not always mean quieter, and that sometimes the only way to stop being a prop in someone else's performance is to let the audience see the stagehands, and if the audience does not like the view, then maybe the show should be rewritten. Later that evening, after my phone stopped shaking, an email from Amanda arrived with no greeting and no punctuation beyond a period at the end. A screenshot clipped tight around a confirmation that the first payment had posted from her card and a single sentence that said she hoped I was happy now, and I wrote back one line that said I was not happy, I was free. And that freedom was going to be very expensive for me to give up again. They can keep their table with the rules that bend around one person's ego, because the seat I am interested in now is the one I made for myself, the one where I do not pay for applause that never reaches me, where I do not subsidize a story that erases me, where I do not argue my value to people who measure love by optics and invoices, and if I ever sit with them again it will be because they learned how to talk to me without conditions and learned how to say thank you without a stage, and until that day I will let them discover what achievement looks like without a hidden donor, which is not petty and not cruel. It is simply accurate, and accuracy is the first step toward a family that tells the truth even when it hurts. And if that day never comes, then at least I will know the ending of this part of my life was written by me, and that is the only victory I needed.